Big white rats are fat. What does that mean? If this big white fat grows taller, will I become obese and not fit into this suit? I have another meaning to that phrase. And I would like to take all of us on a journey to describe what it means to me. Imagine all of us going a half mile off the coast of Del Mar. What will we find? We will find the kelp forests. Kelp is an algae, grows 40 feet tall, has long, flowing leaves and gas sacs that allow it to stretch to the surface. Now, to get to that location, we need to be able to go underwater. That kelp forest is one of the world's most dynamic ecosystems. It has seals, which bring in predators like the great white shark. We have blue whales that come along the coastline. We've got small little nudibranch, similar to a slug, and we have cute orange fish called Garibaldi. So let's get back to big white rats are fat. Big stands for buoyancy control device. This is a buoyancy control device, an air bladder that allows you to ascend if you are negatively buoyant. It has burp valves and inflator. Everything takes maintenance. It should all be checked before entering the water. Thus, we have this acronym to help us move along. Now, within this buoyancy control device are integrated weights. You can put lead in these pouches because we're off the coast of Del Mar. The water is about 68 degrees. We need a thick wetsuit, maybe a 7mm wetsuit. And that wetsuit creates positive buoyancy. You know, we're balloons floating on the water. So you would need to deflate and use your weights to submerge, add a little bit of air to your buoyancy control device so that you are buoyant in the water. So we've covered two, big and white. 3 is rats. The R stands for regulator. The most complicated contraption in this phrase. It's an octopus of tubing. But primarily, it is a high to low pressure valve because your scuba tank is compressed with atmosphere. About 3,500 pounds per square inch of pressure. So you need to convert that pressure to low pressure so that it can be easily breathed. Everything needs duplication. You have a primary breathing device, and then you should always have a safe second. So if one fails, you have something to back you up. Or if a other diver runs out of air, they've got a source they can breathe from before they ascend to the surface. This device has a USB connector that connects to my watch, a dive computer. It allows me to measure my depth and the amount of atmosphere that is pressurized within my system. Now that brings me to our next acronym. R stands for air. That is the compressed gas in a large tank. atmospheric air is 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and about 1% trace gases. It's the 78% nitrogen that gets us into trouble. Examples of that would be the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. The engineers of said project put a container down at the bottom of that river, and workers would go down to work on the pylons. It was 60 feet under. That air and atmosphere was compressed, and as those workers came up, they would bend over in pain, thus coming up with the term the bends. It was nitrogen bubbles getting compressed into the joint spaces. When those nitrogen bubbles expanded, it created pain in the joints. But it can get much worse. It can get into the lung lining, and that expansion injury can collapse the lung. We try to divert that complication now by using mixed gas or enriched gas, one such as nitrox. It increases the oxygen to 28 or 34%, but compressed oxygen can also be deadly. Anything below 110 feet will compress that oxygen and stimulate their neurological system. That creates a shock. Those convulsions would and will be deadly underwater. So you need to take that into consideration. Now, fact to this rather thin white rat is a final check. Typically that's done with a dive buddy, in my case, Trish. We go over the bullet points of this conversation, and then we also talk to a dive master familiar with the area. We look at the location we're diving in. We look at the temperature to make sure our millimeter wetsuit is thick enough. We look at currents. We look at swells. Currents can draw you down, creating a drop or submersion that you don't anticipate. And swells can make you not be able to be visualized at the surface. So everything takes consideration. And remember, if anyone feels a dive is unsafe, you can always opt out. So if y'all feel you are unsafe on this imaginary trip, please bow out and enjoy the ocean from the surface. But if you decide to take that giant leap and go underwater with me, you can see things that most people can only dream of. Mr. Toastman.